Support for this episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere is made possible by the Wessex Press, the premier publisher of books about Sherlock Holmes and his world. Find them online at wessexpress.com.
I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, episode 182. The Polyphonic Motets of Lassus.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became a chronicler.
In a world where it's always 1895, comes I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first unofficial consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we discuss goings-on in the world of Sherlock Holmes enthusiasts, the Baker Street irregulars, and popular culture related to the great detective.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Burt Wolder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come at a better time!
Welcome once again to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees where it's always 1895. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Wolder.
And I am geared up. 6 ways to, well, I don't know 6 melodies to carry at this point. I am not polyphonic. I'm monophonic at best.
You need Dolby Stereo.
I don't need Dolby Stereo. Bert, I've got you.
Oh, that's right.
Well, this is episode 182. If you'd like to find the show notes, they are available at ihearofsherlock.com or directly at ihose.co/ihose182. That's all lowercase. You can reach us by email at comment@ihearofsherlock.com. You can certainly find us on the social networks, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We are I Hear of Sherlock in every one of those cases. And, of course, the lines are open. If you'd like to call us, you can leave us a voicemail at 774-221-READ. That's 774-221-7323. Or if you want to take a voice memo down on your phone and email it to us, that would work as well. We do appreciate the support that you've given us throughout the year. We have a special message at the end of the show for all of our supporters. We do prefer that you go on Patreon. That makes it easy to track, but we have PayPal as an option as well. And all of your support goes to helping with things to keep the show running. Show notes, the transcripts, which we have recently begun to do again. The hosting, the email, everything that makes the show possible is because of you. So thank you. Bert, should we get to our interview here? I'm just dying to hear what's in store.
Yes, please.
We're joined by Ann Margaret Lewis, a Sherlockian from the Indianapolis area who is the author of 2 Sherlockian pastiches that you may have heard of. We've mentioned here on the program, Murder in the Vatican and The Watson Chronicles, both published by our sponsor, Wessex Press. Ann is a longtime Sherlockian and a member of the Adventuresses of Sherlock Holmes, the Illustrious Clients of Indianapolis, the John H. Watson Society, and she's a founding member of the Vatican Cameos. And related to that, Ann is a soprano and sings a lot of liturgical music, and that is part of what we're going to be discussing with Ann on this episode. Ann, welcome to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere.
Hi, Scott and Bert. It's lovely to be here. Love to talk to you guys.
Well, we've threatened you for a long time to get you on the program, and I'm glad we were able to finally make it pay off after all the schedule juggling and whatnot.
Yeah, it could be a little difficult to arrange things. I'm glad we finally made it.
Well, now that you're here, can you tell us how it is that you first encountered Sherlock Holmes in your life?
Well, it's my mother started me on this. I love to read, and I was going through all of my mother's mysteries. She had a lot of Agatha Christie's, and I read them all. Read every single Agatha Christie. I said, "Okay, Mom, what can I read now? Because I really love mysteries. I hadn't read mysteries before I read Agatha Christie." She goes, "Well, why don't you read, Sherlock Holmes? I have a copy of Hound of the Baskervilles over there." So I grabbed that, and I immediately fell in love with this character. And of course, he annoyed me because he vanished halfway through the book. And I was like, "Where'd he go?" And of course, I didn't realize how annoying that he could actually, Doyle as a writer could be, and that he liked to take sojourns in the middle of books. But in this particular one, it was a much more unified book than, of course, like Study in Scarlet and the others. When I read those after that. So, but yeah, Hound of the Baskervilles, that was my gateway drug. And after that, I started reading every Sherlock Holmes piece I could possibly get my hands on. And I've been a fan ever since I was in high school. I think I was about maybe 15 years old, 15 or 16. And ended up going to Michigan State, where I encountered the Greek interpreters of East Lansing. That was my very first scion with Dr. Yates, Don Yates, and Dr. Brody, and all the people who were part of that group there for a while. And I remember that I had my little heart broken because that was when Don Yates told me, "Well, they don't have girls in the BSI." So, and it kind of dates myself because it was back in the 80s, before they actually did allow women into the BSI. So, but I sojourned on, and I am still a Sherlockian to this day. I still love him.
Excellent. So did you attend meetings of the Greek interpreters of Lansing?
I did, and I was also, I went to a number of the meetings, and I was the youngest one in the room because it was kind of funny that they didn't have any other students. They were all professors there. And I actually, I had to do my I was a minor in theater. I was a majored in English and minored in theater. And I had to direct a short play. So I picked The Painful Predicament of Sherlock Holmes as my project to direct, and, by William Gillette. And, I actually recruited a couple of the Greek interpreters to be in it, to be the guys in the white coats that come and take the mad woman away. I don't know if you guys know the little play or not. And also I performed it for them, I brought the actors who were other Michigan State students, and we performed the play for the Greek interpreters at one of the meetings. So it was a lot of fun.
Anne, why don't you tell our listeners a sentence or two about the play and what's unique about it?
Well, what's unique about it is that Holmes doesn't say a single line. It's a real short play. I think it was written as a curtain raiser for William Gillette's Sherlock Holmes play. But Holmes doesn't say a word. And a woman comes in, and she's trying to get him to help her with a particular problem, to find someone. And she's just like yammering on and on and on and on. And she destroys his apartment. Essentially, she breaks his violin, smashes his chemistry set, and in the midst of all this madness, he actually sends a note out by Billy, and then Billy comes back with the men in the white coats, and they take her away. So he doesn't say a word. Now, of course, what's really interesting is as a director, I had to come up with a reason for why Holmes doesn't speak. So to give the actor a bit more to work with, I told him that Sherlock Holmes has laryngitis and he's cold, he's suffering. So if you want to add that suffering to the fact that this woman is destroying his apartment, I think it was even funnier. And it really turned out. I want to direct it again. I think it'd be a lot of fun to do that show, that little vignette again, and it might happen because I do direct shows now. So he might resurface, but that was a lot of fun to do.
Oh, that's great. I love that. I love that direction. Well, Anne, we want to talk to you a little bit about your intersection with Sherlock Holmes and music. And why don't we start by referring to one of the papers that you contributed to 70 Years by Gaslamp. This is the illustrious client's 6th casebook. It's edited by Marianne Bradley, Louise Haskett, and Melanie Hoffman. And this, again, is available from Wessex Press. These, I would imagine, are papers that were given at the illustrious clients over the years. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your paper, if you have any recollection of having presented it, and what your overall thesis was?
Well, actually, the collection of papers, some of them were definitely delivered at clients' meetings. Some of them were just written for the book itself. And I actually wrote this specifically just for the book. I've never presented this. And I probably, I kind of mined this a little bit for my presentation in Dayton. But not really, because this is more, what I wrote. The thesis is that, Orlando de Lassus or Lasso, who is the composer we're going to talk about, a lot of the Baker Street Irregulars, when they've written on the Polyphonic Motets of Lassus, have said that this is just a very rare and he's not performed all that often. In fact, he's not performed at all. And, it seemed like he was a rare bird, and that why would Holmes ever study this strange composer? Well, the truth is that's not true. He is one of the top 3 composers of the Renaissance period, especially for vocal music. And it's kind of interesting. I have a friend of mine who went to Westminster Choir College in New Jersey, who he's Protestant, and I'm writing a paper on Orlando de Lassus. He goes, "Oh, he's great," So even Protestants who study, as long as you study choral music, you're going to know this composer, because he was very unique for his time, and that Holmes would be interested in him. Well, that's something I actually, discussed. I discussed, of course, in Dayton, and I also discussed in here his musical theory was very interesting, and his combinations of certainly his like chord choices and things like that are the type that you would not have heard until like the 20th century. So he was a very good composer, and sometimes very mystifying, which was why I kind of figured Holmes was very into him, because he's difficult. Sometimes his stuff is really difficult to sing, and I have sung a number of his pieces. So.
Excellent.
Now, have we located Lassus there's a couple of things I'm interested in. I don't want to get you off track here. One is finding out a little bit about your own connection to music, because you mentioned when you were in college, you were an English major and you had a minor in theater. But I'm wondering a little bit about your musical background. But also, have we located Lassus in time? My memory is that he was a Renaissance composer, but he was more 16th century than 17th century. And
16th century. Absolutely. 1500s. His dates, hold on a second, I got his dates right here, 1530 to 1594. So, and his dates are almost exactly the same as the other great Renaissance composer, Palestrina. So they were about the same age. I think Lassus might have been a couple of years younger than Palestrina. So they kind of were synchronous 16th century composers of the Renaissance.
And when did your own musical interests or musical abilities, connect you to Renaissance composers? Were you how did your interest in music start?
All right. Well, I started playing piano at the age of 4. So, and after piano, I was in band, and I played baritone horn and band all the way through college. I could always sing, and I sang in choirs. But I didn't know that I knew that I could sing, but I didn't know I could really, really sing. It's kind of funny to say that, but when I left college, I moved to New York. And while I was out there, I was staying in New Jersey with my sister, and she got me to audition for the New Jersey, the Garden State Philharmonic Chorus. Now I'm pretty good, strong second soprano. You stick me in there, I will not shift off that part. So that's why I auditioned for this. And when the guy heard me sing, he said, "Have you ever studied voice?" I'm like, "Nah." He goes, "You need to study voice." I'm like, "Uh-oh." So when I left, I was kind of blowing it off. I was like, there's no way I can afford this. I'm living in New York. And my sister Karen goes, "Well, Ann, he's from Juilliard, so you better listen to him." So I'm like, "Oh, okay." So I found a private teacher. So my instruction vocally has been private instruction. I studied for a good 15 years in New York. And then I moved out here to Indianapolis, and I have been singing. I sing with the opera chorus, and it's kind of weird. I'm the only probably non-music major in the opera chorus. I've been with all these PhDs in vocal music, and I just me, little old me, sitting there singing my little soprano part. It's kind of fun. But that's my musical background. Now, of course, being a soprano and being I sing in a lot of choruses. They hire me to be a ringer. And I started singing out here. When I first came out here, I was at a parish that is through the diocese. It's official parish through the diocese. And they do the traditional Latin Mass there, as well as the regular English Mass that we know. And they needed people in their choir. So I said, well, this is a new experience. So I started singing with the Latin Mass choir. And through that, I learned to read Gregorian chant, and I started singing a lot of polyphony. And boy, did they do a lot of polyphony. I mean, so I sung a lot of Lassus pieces, a number of his masses. And after that, I started singing at the cathedral here in Indianapolis, and they do a lot of polyphony at the cathedral as well. So I kind of fell into singing Lassus because I'm a trained singer, and they needed people, in some of these choirs for some of this difficult music, because you can't just throw somebody into this unless you been schooled in it a little bit. So, learned a lot in the last 10 years that I've been here.
Yeah, for our listeners, I don't want to get you off track, which this is the second time I've said that, I notice this. But I'm also interested in sort of scratching my own curiosity here. Now, because you just said something really very interesting, which sort of keys to the whole idea of polyphonic motets, as I remember that reference. And we should point out to our listeners that this whole thing comes from a relatively minor mention in the Bruce-Partington Plans, where Watson identifies Holmes as working on this terrific monograph, which we might talk about a little bit more. But my memory of this is at this time in the musical life of civilization, the structure of music was quite different from what evolved later, in that it was a 4-bar staff instead of a 5-bar staff, and nobody was singing in harmony. And I'm sure that explanation is poor and inaccurate. That's all I can really remember. But could you say a little bit about the difference between Gregorian chant? Because you just mentioned how difficult this was, and I just thought we might explain that a little bit for our listeners.
Well, originally Western music, the very first Western music is Gregorian chant. I mean, at least written down that we have. And it was written in neumes, which are these little square notes. And what's kind of strange is that the key can change. You don't have to sing it all in one certain key. So it's for me, getting my head around it after reading regular Western music notation, not modern, it was hard to get around that. Now, original, chant is what they call monophonic. Let me back up real quick. There's a couple different textures in choral music. When I say textures, it's kind of the layering of voices. Okay, how voices are layered, how they're used. Okay, and that creates a texture. Monophonic singing is basically everyone singing in unison, and you have all different vocal registers. Like you'll have the tenor, sopranos, and they're all singing together in unison on a melody. So there's one melody, one voice, one melodic line. Okay, monophonic singing. That's chant. Now, what polyphony is, what they started doing in this particular period that you're talking about, Bert, is they started to add harmonies, and it started with doing, I think, just a fourth or a pedal tone, underneath under it. And so they started experimenting with singing different notes underneath it, and then they started layering them in chords, and so you end up with homophony and polyphony. So the difference is, we have, I don't know, Bert, Scott, you have a sample of monophonic singing. You have the chant that I kind of talked about with, in Dayton, the Dies Irae, which is a kind of an example of, first of all, it's monophonic. It has one melody line. And that's just one texture of it. Did you want to play that, or did you want to?
Yeah, let's pull this up to give people a sense as to what's going on. It's about a 7.5 minute clip. We don't have to play the whole thing.
No, I don't have to. But it's kind of it's interesting. This particular chant, though, I call it the coolest chant ever. I love this chant, and because it has lots of different. The melodic line changes as it goes, but it goes in a direction you think it should go. So it's very satisfying to listen to. But this is also used in a lot of movie scores.
Yes.
A lot of movie scores. You'll hear the da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. It appears in it appears in Star Wars, certainly. I know it appears if you saw Home Alone, it appeared in that. Every time you saw the creepy old man that the boy encounters, they da 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 da, and later on it changes into it changes into they change it into Carol of the Bells to kind of make it positive, because the guy's not really as bad as he looks. So anyway, Dies Irae, which if you want to play a little bit of it.
Yes, I'm chanting. I'm chanting at the bit over here. Dies irae, dies irae, salve seculum in famiglia, te se David cum civilia.
At least you get an idea of the couple melodies that they've gotten going on here. It changes halfway through. And I also like, in this particular recording, it's kind of interesting because you have the older guys and then you have the boys, and they switch it back and forth. You can do that in chant. You can have different voices singing different sections of the chant. So, and this one, of course, is sung during a funeral mass. That's why it's used in all these things for the dark stuff, because it's meant for a funeral. But that's why I call it. Yeah,
but that's a familiar tune for a lot of people. It should evoke many things. We've heard it in certainly in funeral masses, like by Verdi and whatnot. We hear it coming up again and again.
Yeah, it was also. I think it also appeared in. What's the name? There was a movie with Richard Burton. When he actually excommunicates. Oh gosh, what's the name of that movie now? I'm blanking on it. It'll come back to me later.
Was it A Man for All Seasons? No, not A Man for All Seasons, was it?
Not A Man for All Seasons. It's the other one.
Cleopatra.
The other one. But yeah, he excommunicates the guy. But if you look up Richard Burton excommunication scene, you will hear this, because they use it. They use it for that.
Now, we should point out to our listeners that there's a lot going on there. One is that you're not listening to any instruments.
Yes, you're not. They didn't really. I think they had organs, but for something, if they needed to, they would support the singing with a chord or a note underneath or a pedal tone. Mm-hmm. But that was later. Before that, all they had was this, and it certainly led to an interesting development into polyphony, because that kind of melody is what is layered in polyphony. Okay, so each melodic line. So when I said it's monophonic, that means one voice. The voice is, of course, the melody line. When we look at homophony, which is the next kind of thing that kind of developed It is, you have several voices, all on one melodic line, but they are complementing each other. So it's, the word hymn comes from homophony. So all of your hymns that you sing in church or wherever are all homophonic generally. And there's a sample I think I gave Scott, that is Hide Not Thou Thy Face From Us, which is by Richard Ferrant, who is an English composer of the same period. In fact, his dates are almost exactly the same as Lassus's, okay? And you'll hear this is it's an anthem because it is English, first of all. If it was homophonic, if it was polyphonic, it would be a motet. But because it's homophonic, it's considered an anthem. And also because it's in English. Interesting, these little terms that you get. But
why don't we give that a listen now?
Okay. So this is homophony. What's kind of neat is I've actually sung every piece that you're doing here. I've sung, so this is I love this piece. It's very pretty. It's very nice little texture there, but it's definitely homophony.
Yeah,
homophonic. So now when Watson starts talking, he's the Polyphonic Motets of Lassus. Every motet is polyphonic. So, you can't have a motet that is not polyphonic. So he's kind of being a little redundant there.
Okay.
Yeah, that's kind of funny. But when you have polyphony, basically what it means is you have multiple melody lines going on. Okay, so every voice is a melody line of its own. And people who know anything about music that developed from this, you have the Baroque period, and that really goes crazy on that idea where you have all sorts of different instruments doing their own little melody lines, and adding on to that. It all started with polyphony. Yep, go ahead.
Now there are some of our listeners who would think that the answer to the question, what's the opposite of a lestet, is motet, but that's not true.
No. Motet is here in Detroit, Bert.
A motet specifically is a piece that is written for the liturgy, the Catholic liturgy, okay, that fits in. First of all, it's written in polyphony. As I said, it has to be polyphonic to be a motet. And a motet's got to be polyphonic. It's one way to, but you have a cycle of readings in the Catholic Church, okay? Certain days have certain readings. And the motet kind of takes the text of one of those readings and just sort of goes, bloop, you can stick it in there. You can perform this piece instead of having it read. Especially if you ever get a chance to see a traditional Latin Mass, it's kind of cool. Everything is sung. Everything is sung from the beginning to the end. All right. So especially, the high Mass. If you go to a low Mass, it's kind of quiet and not much happening. It's kind of silent. But a sung Mass, they're going to sing everything. They're going to sing the gospel. They're going to sing all the readings. They're going to, and they have like a psalm that is done in between things. That is all sung. Usually it is chanted, but if you have a motet that has the right text, you can do that instead. And that's what a motet is for.
So typically then it would need to be sung by a group of people, not just the priest celebrating the Mass. Is that right?
Yeah, well, if it's polyphony, yes. Yeah, you definitely need more than one voice.
Right.
So the like you would have the sections of the Mass are introit. I have to sit there and remind myself now. And of course you have the gradual, which is that song. You have a reading and then you do a gradual. Gradual is kind of like if in the modern Mass, it'd be like our psalm, right? That is usually when a motet is used, if it's going to be used. It's also used for communion because there is actually, even in a modern Mass, there is text or an antiphon that can be sung during communion. The specific text that is required for that day that you should sing during communion. But people, they usually do hymns instead, but you can do, and we often do, in fact, we do that at the Cathedral of St. Peter and Paul. We will do a polyphonic piece of that's required text for communion that day. So it kind of fits in. And it's not necessarily said by the priest. Although the priest can do it, if there's nobody else that can, he would probably just chant it. So.
Well, why don't we take a listen to a sample of this? I think it's Sicut Servus.
Sicut Cervus. This is by Lassus. His contemporary and probably the greatest Renaissance polyphony composer of the period is Giovanni Palestrina, the Palestrina. And it's beautiful. This is only sung once a year, by the way. I'll explain after you hear it.
Okay. So what was so special about the Sicut Cervus?
Sicut Cervus is sung at Easter Vigil, and it's when it's really only sung as they process back to the holy water font to bless it. I mean, really, that whole piece was for a processional to go to the holy water font. They carry the Easter candles, this giant, giant candle, and they just sort of process it with all the altar boys and the priests and everything. They process around the church to the holy water font to bless it.
Sounds like a big church.
And the word, sorry, what?
It sounds like it was a big church.
Must have been. Well, for him, Palestrina was writing for the Vatican. So
there you go.
It would have been walking through St. Peter's with that. So what's interesting, I mean, I have sung this, of course, at Easter Vigil, and it means, the words are, as a deer longs for the running water, so my soul longs for you, oh my God. And if you listen to it, knowing that, you can literally hear the water flowing over the river. I mean, Palestrina was genius. Wow. It's beautiful. It's a truly beautiful piece of music. And it's very unique that way. Now, and the text is kind of important because I'll bring it up later when we get to it. I'm going to surprise you.
No spoilers. Yeah.
But just to point out to the listeners that if you were listening as you're listening to it, each vocal part is on its own melody line, as I said, and none of the parts are more important than the other. They all have the same weight, and they all kind of take over kind of this melody line at one point or another, and they repeat a theme, but they don't. But each line is definitely unique. Now, what's also kind of cool about the music of this particular period and this kind of music, the parts, you know how you have alto, soprano, tenor, and bass, or soprano, alto, tenor, and bass, whatever. Each vocal part, had its own book, and it was just their part. So, as a person who sings polyphony, that would make me mad because as you're singing all of this, you will depend on the other parts to give you the pitch you need to come in and things like that. So I rely, as I look at the four staves and I could see what everybody else is singing. And while I'm singing my own melody line, I'm listening for them so I can get where I need to go, right? Mm-hmm. They couldn't do that. They had just their tenor part. So if you imagine trying to learn music and sing music that way, that's how. And then eventually, someone got the great idea to actually layer it in staves like that. So I was like, "Hooray!" It made vocal music a lot easier to deal with, and also modern music notation was developed during this period. So there's a lot of, when you get a piece of music like this, people who set it down or typeset it, there's a lot of editorial markings, or some of them are just left out altogether, or there might be some strange, like meters, or strange, certainly, the idea of modern music theory or chords, was developed during this period. So there, you might get some really strange keys. It might change, and you might expecting you're like in the key in D, and suddenly it sounds like it's in the key of B flat. It's like, what? It'll change in the middle, especially with Lassus. He will shift keys on you, and there's no key signature change. You're just like, why are, some of these things just don't make sense in his. It's really kind of interesting. Yeah. And it's baffling at times, too.
Yeah, well, it sounds like it's incredibly challenging for the performers.
It can be, yes. It can be definitely challenging.
Well,
to try to figure out your part
right,
in relation to everybody else.
Well, we're going to get to Lassus right after this quick word from our sponsor.
In the ancient Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Wessex, we are looking forward to Hogmanay and the tradition of first foot. Gifts from the first person to cross our threshold after the stroke of midnight on the new year. But you will already have good fortune once you order your copy of The Science Fiction Worlds of Arthur Conan Doyle and H.G. Wells by Dana Martin Batory. These essays explore landmark science fiction, including the last Professor Challenger story, When the World Screamed, and it's available right now from our WesExpress.com. Ring out the old, Ring in the new, ring out the false, ring in the true, ring out the want, the care, the sin, but ring the fuller minstrel in. Begin your new year by reaching for the pleasure only a volume from the Wessex Press can provide. Choose yours today.
And we're back. We're talking with Ann Margaret Lewis about the Polyphonic Motets of Lassus and polyphony and homophony and all those phony things. We thought we would get back into Orlando de Lassus. You recall that Holmes was working on the Polyphonic Motets of Lassus, as Watson indicated, and Ann already told us that motets are always polyphonic, so he was a little redundant there, showing Watson's ignorance of music. But Ann, would Lassus and his contemporaries and polyphonic music have been in vogue in Victorian times?
I think it would still have been used during Victorian times. You had, because you still had the Mass in Latin, right? Mm-hmm. And you didn't want, there were always new composers writing new things for the Mass. It's not to say that they weren't. But the old standards certainly came in handy. They were used to them. And so I would say, I don't know if there's necessarily a vogue, but they were still used in Catholic churches, especially if people could learn to sing polyphony. Some churches, they didn't have a choir that could accomplish that. So they sang more simple chants. And they also, you ended up, of course, with the Romantic period and leading into what we call 20th century music, you had new composers writing new things that they probably started to use. But I think, the idea of sacred polyphony never went away as long as the Latin Mass was still there.
But
they were always singing it. Now, doing it, in concerts and stuff like that, probably not.
Okay, that's what I was going to get at. Yeah,
yeah, probably not in concerts.
Holmes would not have been in St. James Hall swinging his fingers to the polyphonic motets in concert.
He might have been exposed to definitely polyphony and, going to school in chapel. Because, that's what, these are sung a cappella. They're, like, as Bert pointed out, they're unaccompanied. So you are singing a cappella, and a cappella means in the chapel. And so there's English polyphony, like Thomas Tallis, who wrote in English. So there is English polyphony. And so you would sing polyphony anyway, and someone might have translated a Lassus piece, Directors do that. They can go and just grab a piece in Latin and write the English words over it, and you learn it in English. Or a lot of times if it's high church Anglican, they may sing it in Latin, just for the heck of doing it. So he probably was exposed to polyphony in chapel. Apparently Arthur Conan Doyle was, because he knew what a motet was. He went to Jesuit school, so he probably heard polyphony there too. So it was done in chapel.
Well, we've got a couple of clips of Lassus here. Why don't we cue up the first one here? It's about a minute or so long. And then after we hear it, you can perhaps explain a little more to us.
Yeah. One thing, should I tell everybody what to listen for in this so it makes it different than the last piece that they heard?
Absolutely.
Okay. Lassus liked to experiment a lot. And so he did a lot of chromatic harmonies, like going up a scale, da 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 da. He did a lot of that. There's a lot of dissonance in this, which means that you have pitches that clash. He shifts key. An average listener might not notice that, but they might go, well, that sounds bizarre. What happened there? You'll hear it. It'll go, something shifts in the music and you go, what changed there? Unexpected melodic turns. A lot of times these melodies that you're hearing don't go the direction you think they're going to go. They just don't. He has a lot of syncopated rhythms, which is very unique for his period. Okay, he started experimenting with the time signatures and doing all sorts of crazy things. And definitely he changes texture going in and out he'll be going in polyphony, and suddenly he'll switch to homophony. He'll have a little hymn section where all the voices are working together, and then suddenly, boom, they'll break back out again. So he likes to experiment a lot, and he definitely does that in Jubilate Deo.
Wow.
Now, what'd you guys think of that?
Definitely different.
Yeah, definitely. Did you hear the strange changes of key in there?
Yeah, it was like I was on a car chase and somebody just turned a corner really quickly.
Yeah, and he does that a lot. And he also does it, this is particular, as I said, that these go for a specific Sunday or a specific day. And this is the third Sunday of Easter, the introit. The introit is the opening of the Mass. So as they're coming in, you'd be hearing that. Jubilate Deo, rejoice in the Lord, always. So it's really it's a cool, and of course that's perfect for Easter. It's very happy.
Yeah.
Then, of course, the opposite, in Monte Oliveti is in the Mount of Olives. This is for Holy Thursday Mass, because the Holy Thursday Mass starts out really jubilant and then it becomes very dark. Yeah. And this is from the end of the Mass or near the end of the Mass. And this is written for 6 parts and it really goes in a lot of different directions. It's kind of definitely interesting.
Well, to any of our listeners who fell asleep while driving, please don't rear-end that semi-truck.
Yeah. It's not meant to
soothing.
necessarily put you to sleep, but it's certainly meditative.
Yes. Very, very calming.
And when you're singing it, you're like going, oh my gosh, you're like freaking out because you want it, because there's a lot of support in that one. You have to have a lot of air for that one because it is so, drawn out,
Right.
It's very mournful. And of course, it's Mount of Olives, this Christ's agony in the garden is what you're hearing. It's quite a,
Not a lighthearted moment.
It certainly makes you relax, but you can still, you get the idea that he liked to be experimental. You had the idea of the chromatic, like to experiment a lot with chromaticism and dissonance and all that other neat stuff. And that's my guess as to why Holmes really latched onto hearing him or listening to his music if he could get a chance, because it was so, in terms of that period, it was different. When you heard the Palestrina, everything he did made sense. Where he went made sense. Even though it was different, you sit there and you listen to it and you go, oh, that's pretty. With him, you go, what did he just do? And that's pretty much what happens with his music. And in fact, the piece that I'm learning now, we're singing a piece for the third Sunday of Advent, which is, it fits the text for our offertory antiphon for the day. And it's got some really interesting, difficult stuff in there because you are waiting for a particular note to come out, and it's not that one. You'll be expecting in the key to have a sharp where there's a natural, and you go, okay, that doesn't sound right. But it somehow does work and is very interesting. In fact, some of these chord combinations he does, you didn't hear again until the 20th century.
Wow.
That's why probably Holmes thought it was interesting, because he didn't hear it again. In his lifetime, he'd never heard anything of that type.
Right.
In terms of chord combinations.
Well, we know from Watson that Holmes would spend time with his fiddle in his lap, scratching out weird sounds, and people have speculated, that could have been early modern music, but that's a potential link between Holmes' interest in this music and his monograph, which sadly is lost. We've lost the last word on this subject.
Yes, we have, very sadly, because I would have loved to have read it.
Well, while we're on the subject, and before we get too far away from it, tell us a little bit about the Vatican cameos.
Oh, the Vatican cameos. This is a group of Catholic Sherlockians. We call ourselves Cathlockians. And, we'll discuss story here and there and things like that. But, we're primarily online. We have a Facebook group. And what we do is we will hook up with each other at various Sherlockian events and go to mass together. And if we can, we'll have a dinner or lunch together or something, or breakfast. And we will toast Pope Leo the 13th, who is the, only one that we know of who hired Holmes more than once to solve a case. And of course, Ronald Knox, who started the Grand Game. So it's just a fun thing that we do to make sure we all get to mass like good little Catholics. But we do spend our time discussing Holmes. And one of our guys likes to read the entire canon during Advent, and he finishes with the last story at Christmas Day. So he spends his Advent reading Sherlock Holmes.
Wow.
It's his thing he does to prepare for Christmas because it's just a happy thing for him. So I think that's really kind of neat. So yeah, definitely Sherlockians, definitely Catholic. And we have, lots of little fun discussions but primarily we just kind of get together and go to mass, and then we have lunch together and toast the Pope.
Yeah.
Pope Leo XIII.
Yeah, you should add Albertus Magnus to the saints of your for toasting.
Great,
sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because there's a great connection there between Sherlock Holmes and the Adventuresses, of course, because Evie and some of her colleagues in those early days were all students at Albertus Magnus.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Didn't realize. Cool.
Which
of course, he's really early. I mean, Albertus Magnus was 13th century, wasn't he? Something early.
I'd have to look him up, but I think you're about right.
His friends called him Big Al.
Big Al. Oh, not that chair. That chair is reserved for Albertus.
Now, I'd be remiss, Anne, if I didn't mention that the reason this subject came to my attention was because we both attended the Holmes, Doyle and Friends conference in Dayton in March of this year, and this is where you presented this very paper. And Holmes, Doyle and Friends, which is an annual occurrence in Dayton, is hosted by Dan Andriacco. And of course, Dan is also a member of the Vatican Cameos. So,
yes, indeed.
It all comes full circle. Now, there was, and I want you to help solve the mystery here, because I raised my hand at the end of your presentation, and I mentioned there was something that I thought might have been part of one of Lassus's works. It was what Jeremy Brett was singing in the Granada version of the Bruce-Partington Plans. You know, of course, you had that opening scene. He was bored out of his skull. He was biting his nails. He was tapping on the table, and he was humming a Latin type tune. And I remember you looked at me quizzically and you said, "Oh yeah, I think I kind of remember that." And then afterwards, we exchanged audio files, and you did a little research and identified it. So why don't I play the clip, and then you can talk about the significance of it and how it came to be.
Okay.
Cervus ad fontes aquarum desiderat, cervus ad fontes aquarum.
Yeah, it's really fun. All I needed was the first couple words, and I could find it.
So it was an actual piece of music that he was singing. It wasn't just something made up.
It's an actual piece of music by Lassus. It's Quemadmodum Desiderat, and all of these pieces are named after the first few words, which are, of course, the words of the Mass, right? Or the words of the day. Now, what I told you, that the words that I said for sicut cervus, as a deer longs for the running water, so my soul longs for you, oh my God, this is the very same text. However, it's kind of, he kind of shifted the language around a little bit. It is still the same text. So it is as a deer longs for the running water, and it would probably be sung at the very same time I mentioned before at Easter Vigil for the blessing of the holy water font. And what he is singing is the tenor line of the piece.
Okay.
And I wish, I dug everywhere for a copy, a recording of this, and one does not, I've not been able to find one that exists. So, I actually, I mentioned it to my choir director at the cathedral, and, we might record this for us, and then we can actually share it with you. But it is a love, from what I could tell, it's a lovely piece. And a lot of the stuff that he writes is gorgeous. So I'm sure it's cool. But yes, he's singing the tenor line from a Lassus piece, Quemadmodum Desiderat, which is for Easter Vigil, the blessing of the holy water font.
Do you think that would hold any significance to this particular story, or would it just be that they were just trying to illustrate what one of the parts from a motet would sound like?
I was like shocked that they picked one and that he actually learned it and he was actually singing it in the right key. So he did a pretty good job with it. And I don't know about the significance, but if you think about it, as a deer longs for the running water, what is Holmes longing for in this particular show, in that particular story?
A case.
A case. So my soul longs for you.
That's great.
So he's singing of longing, of wanting to be able to get out there and start solving the case. And I think that would fit. Absolutely. But I don't know if that's why they picked it. I think they might have just randomly picked a bass, and he learned the tenor line. God bless him. Good job. I would put him on baritone personally, because I think his voice is deeper than a tenor voice. And he'd probably be happier singing baritone.
Yeah,
but
he was stretching a little bit there.
He did pretty well.
Yeah. Well, I like your theory. I like that theory about the longing.
So, yeah, that's pretty cool. I was so excited. I was like, oh my gosh, I know the words. I can find it. I was all excited when you pointed it out to me.
So what else are you working on, Ann? What's next for you?
What is next for me? I am, right now I'm in the middle of writing my second book in a science fiction trilogy. And I am brainstorming some ideas for a new Sherlock Holmes story that I want to write for the illustrious clients. And I don't want to give any more away for that, but I have a short story idea that it was specifically, I want to dedicate it to the illustrious clients, because I found a way. I don't want to give it away.
Okay. We'll respect that.
Give it away.
You don't want our 7 listeners to find out.
That's a little to find out. But yes, I do have an idea for another short Sherlock Holmes story that I think I'm going to tackle real soon. And set in 1913, which I think would be kind of fun. I don't know if I need to wait until, there's still Sherlock Holmes. I mean, they're still, for the most part, they are all public domain, right?
I think
we got to wait a couple of years.
Maybe
still.
7 more that are left at this point. So
okay,
just about all of them.
Okay. So, I don't know. I'm going to have to ask permission to publish one. If it's 1913, but I have an idea. And it takes me a while. Sometimes I have to, I get these little brainstorms. So, yeah. So that's what I'm working on right now. That and my science fiction book. I don't know if people are into science fiction, but I wrote a space opera because I love space opera. I mean, one of the books I published early on in my career was a Star Wars book. Related to Star Wars, and so I've always loved science fiction and especially space opera. So I wrote one called Warrior of the Kazan. You can find it on Amazon. It's not by Wessex Press. Sorry.
That's okay.
But yeah. So I'm still working on some writing, and I'm always writing. It's always something I do.
Excellent.
And still singing too.
Yes.
That's doing my bit.
Well, Ann Margaret Lewis, soprano, liturgical singer, author of Murder in the Vatican and the Watson Chronicles and the Warrior of the Kazan and other titles coming soon to bookshelves near you. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge of music and Sherlock Holmes and the intersection of the two with us.
Well, I appreciated being here. It was a lot of fun. I love talking to you guys.
That was great. Thank you, Ann. You're a real Renaissance woman.
You could say that.
Yeah. When I first heard early music like this, it was when I was in a music appreciation class in college. I was really bowled over by it, so it's wonderful to hear it.
Now, what kind of music were you?
Unaccompanied voice, the clarity of the line, the simplicity of it. Really, well, of course, that's the whole point. I mean, the reason why it survived, I mean, there's lots of music from the Renaissance. There's lots of Italian, German lieder and all sorts of things.
Sure.
But this stuff survived because it was written down. It was written down because it was part of trying to mark and amplify the most important ceremonies and moments of the year. So it's really magnificent.
Sure. Well, and you had all those scribes in the monasteries that needed to be kept busy. Well, this was after the printing press, I suppose, but still, the printed version of the Mass and the Latin and just the church traditions were extraordinarily important to the furtherance of the church.
Yeah.
So now, what other kind of music did you appreciate in this class?
Oh, everything. It was nice to be with a group of students who were all discovering something new at different times. I mean, it was a survey course that went from the earliest days of music to the moment. And so everything, if you had never worried or thought much about jazz, about improvisation, you got that. Show tunes, opera, Gilbert and Sullivan, Anna Russell.
Oh, this explains far too much about you. It's like your Batman origin story.
Oh.
This is like your parents being shot in front of you.
No, it's not. That wasn't really the moment that was definitive for Bruce Wayne at all. A lot of that is just cartoon comic book myth. His life was really shaped when he met Alfred the butler, and Alfred began instructing him and keeping alive the traditions and customs that had been dead for generations. And
there you go.
For example, his first cravat. I think that was a life-changing experience for Bruce Wayne.
Isn't it every young man's?
Yes, yeah. Sure.
Those strains of violins mean that it's time for everyone's favorite Sherlockian quiz show. That's right. It's Canonical Couplets. Here on I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, we give you 2 lines of poetry, and you need to identify the Sherlock Holmes story that they refer to. Now, the last time we were here, in episode 181, we gave you this clue. Enough for him to kiss her garment's hems and cheer while millions tumbled in the Thames. Bert, do you know which story that couplet refers to?
Yes, that refers to the rarely read adventure of Sherlock Holmes that involved the boiled cookie. I think it was called the blanched shortbread, wasn't it?
Oh, I keep trying to gird myself for the eventuality that is every quiz response here. No, Bert, at least you're consistent. I'll say that. I'm going to have to give you a no on this one again. We were looking for the sign of 4. The sign of 4, because the millions that tumbled in the Thames were when Jonathan Small opened the treasure chest and dumped the Agra treasure into the Thames. So, unfortunately, you don't get a prize this time, Bert. But we do have someone who does. And what we're going to do is we're going to spin the big prize wheel here and watch it go round and round and round. And here it slows down and lands on number 15. Number 15. And that corresponds to Rosie Waper. Rosie, congratulations. We'll be in touch with your prize from the IHO's vaults. Well, now, are you ready for this episode's canonical couplet?
Yes.
Here we go. A jealous wife, whose charms were on the wane, endowed her rival with the brand of Cain. If you think you know the answer to this canonical couplet, jot it down in an email addressed to comment@ihearofsherlock.com with the subject canonical couplet. If you're among the lucky winners who have selected the right answer and we select your name, you may win. Good luck. Oh, Bert, I'm really, really hoping for you. I'm praying for you next time that you get this one right. It's got to happen one of these times.
I don't know what the problem is. There are only 60 of these things. You
know,
I should be able to.
Yeah, we're running out here. I think we've done almost the entire canon's worth. I think we have maybe about 10 more or so to go. And then we're going to have to come up with a new concept for a quiz.
Or we'll ask our listeners to write couplets for it. Well, no, but that wouldn't work because, people would have to be on the honor system and not call in and send us a note about something that they've written.
Well, maybe we should do this the way the Speckled Band of Boston runs their quiz, and that is that the winner of the previous quiz has to write the quiz for the next dinner. Yeah, well, our 7 listeners may not be up to the task. It'd be very repetitive over time. So, well, anyway, we hope that you are all participating. It costs nothing to play. And you can win more than once. We like to try to mix it up as best we can, but you certainly can win if you have played before. So go right ahead. The vaults are full, and we look forward to you playing at some point in the future. And we're rounding the corner to 2020. We have lots of plans ahead. We have a full roster of interviews for the year. Of course, we do this show every 2 weeks, 2 times a month. So that means by my calculation, there will be exactly 57 interviews in 2020? Is that how it works? No.
Yeah, that's exactly right, I think.
26, I think, is the number we're going for.
Oh, dear.
Yeah. And also to note, for anyone who is a patron of ours, if you go to patreon.com/IHearOfSherlock, or if you simply start out on the IHearOfSherlock.com website and hit that orange Become a Patron button, it doesn't matter how little you give, whether it's $1 a month or $5 or $10 a month, whatever you can afford, you will be part of a select crew that at the end of 2019 gets a very special extra episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. It's our outtakes episode. Oh, you think the crap you hear from us right now is entertaining? You should hear what doesn't make it onto the air. It will be all safe for work. No need to worry there. We'll bleep it if appropriate, but you'll hear all the outtakes, the technological fumbles, the jokes we tell each other, the silence. It's going to be a long show if we put all the silence in. All of the ums and ahs that we had to edit out throughout the year, those will be included for free in the outtakes episode. No, I'm kidding. There will be no silence. And no humor. Also, yeah, can't have that. So anyway, if you would care to partake in that, and if you would care to support the show at any rate, we do welcome that. Until next time, when we join you with, some tales for tots, I am the toddling along Scott Monty.
And I am the polyphonic Bert Wolder.
And together, we say, the game's afoot.
The game's afoot.
I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I am neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck, and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.